Hello, 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 everyone. A huge thank you for joining us today for today's panel on building greener software, which, oh, by the way, can cut your cloud costs by approximately 50%. This is a lead dev online panel discussion created in partnership with Harness. The conversation going to last about 45 minutes, which for both myself and the panelists. Then we will head over to the lead dev Slack to answer any of your questions in the hashtag panel Q&A channel. I'll drop that in for those live. If you have questions live, we really welcome it. This got real serious, real fast, like very contentious in a really fun, good way in the planning call. So we all agree that the earth is important. We all agree that probably folks don't care enough. So what does that mean? How do we influence leadership to care about not only budget, but carbon budget? There's a lot of things that can be done. I really do recommend you ask questions if you're joining us live. Thank you. And if we don't answer them live, it'll be in the Slack community, which I'll add in the chat now. So let's get started with introductions. My name is Jennifer Riggins. I'm a tech journalist, and then I would ask that each of you introduce yourself. So Mark, why don't you kick off?
Well, thank you for having me. So I'm Mark Butcher from Positive, and everything I do is in the world of digital sustainability and green ops. So I come to this conversation with a fair bias that you can probably guess. Patrick?
Very good. Yeah. Patrick Brogan from Harness, and I've spent the last 6 years or so of my career building and running FinOps practices, primarily at large financial institutions in the US. I've run them, sitting in the CFO organization as well as in the CTO organization, understand the tension between those two sides of the house, but certainly understand the importance of caring about the cloud bill and what you can do to make things more efficient. I'm now at Harness as a FinOps advisory director, which is to help our prospective customers and existing customers along their own FinOps maturity journeys, whether they're just getting started or sort of midstream and looking to take the next step. And I'm excited to be here today.
Okay, thank you both so much. We hopefully will have a third panelist in Ann Curry. It's 2026. We can get to the moon. Probably we're trying again, but webinars, live streams, meetings, you're on mute, all of these things we haven't figured out, and no one seems to think.
Maybe I'll start a podcast, call it You're on Mute. That'd be a pretty good one.
I bet you someone already has.
I'm sure it's already doing.
If it was a real person or an AI podcast, who's to know anymore? Because we have that level of sophistication. So I just want to start with some definitions, because we've mentioned GreenOps, we've mentioned FinOps. Let's make sure there's still tech loves a portmanteau. Let's try to define what those are and what's the difference. Since you are director of FinOps advisory, what does that really mean? And then I want Mark to tie it together if we can in a little
Sure. Yeah, love to. So FinOps, definitely an interesting portmanteau. People often think it is short for financial operations. In fact, it is a mashup of finance and DevOps. And it operates in much the same way that DevOps does, where you have a number of different personas all sort of circled together around the same challenge or problem, and working together within their own responsibilities to, in the case of FinOps, ensure that you're not just aware of your cloud spend, you're not just trying to reduce your cloud spend, although that is a worthy goal, but you're looking to drive business value from every dollar that you spend on the cloud. So how do you tie the expense of a cloud bill, whether it's a steady state and you're spending the same amount of money every year, or you're growing your cloud spend? How do you derive and demonstrate to leadership and company executives that the money that they're spending on the cloud actually delivers business value? So that to me is really the crux of what FinOps is here to solve.
Okay, Mark. GreenOps, which may be a made-up word I just made up. Who knows?
Yeah, no. So GreenOps it's a thing. It's a developing thing. It's far less mature than the world of FinOps. And the one thing about it is you often hear cloud people particularly say that GreenOps is cloud sustainability. It's not at all. Never has been. What it actually is, it's the principle that covers the entire operations of IT. It's not just cloud, it's data centers, infrastructure, software development. It's how you buy, what you buy, why you buy. It's how you utilize, it's your operational standards, your process, your governance, your budgeting, the everything to do with looking at your world of IT through the lens of sustainability and the environmental impact of your services. And it's an interesting thing because it's an enabler to ease the path to many other decisions. So it aligns perfectly well with the world of FinOps, because FinOps effectively at its heart is really about the aligning business value of cloud spend. So it's helping you understand the efficiency of what you spend, why you spend it, bringing intelligence to it. And GreenOps in the world of cloud is just aligning that from that sustainability impact, helping people understand consciously their decisions have an impact on the wider world. That the cloud is not some truly sustainable, wonderful thing lurking out there. It's actually just another data center, as everyone always says. And many of the cloud data centers these days are actually, some of them are, well, they're actually quite old now. Some of them operate a lot of legacy infrastructure. Many of the cloud providers actually have the same problem that legacy IT had for many years. So actually GreenOps fits with anything you're doing in IT, whether it's in the cloud, in the data center, or on your desk.
Is it a branding problem? First of all, I think the cloud was probably a nefarious, floaty, whimsical name that no one should have come up with, because it really does physically take our mind away from this idea of something that has weight and permanence, though nothing's more permanent than a data center's environmental impact, right?
Yeah, so, sort of, yes, but it's something where measuring the impact has always been very hard, and mainly because actually the cloud providers have not made it easy to measure the impact, because their branding and their marketing for many years has been predicated on the principle that we are the most practically perfect, most efficient, sustainable operators in the planet. So go with us, because if you do, when you read their marketing all day long, it says things like we are 99% more sustainable. It's nonsense. It's
Then
completely
what? They don't usually say then anything, right?
Yeah. So what you find they normally do is they pick the most practically perfect cloud deployment that's never existed, and they balance that against the ugliest, most horrible infrastructure in a data center, and say, look, we've reduced it by 99%. And the truth is no, because the truth is always somewhere in between. You could have a perfect data center and a clumsy cloud. You can equally have a wonderfully well-configured cloud service and an ugly data center. So it's that whole sustainability that you bring into it. So the accountability of how you build, deploy, and understand how you're delivering your services. So no one's passing blame on technology here. It's actually how you consume the technology that's the problem.
Fair enough. Okay, so when we're talking about FinOps and GreenOps, we're talking about them because one is kind of a good parody for the other. So if you were good at FinOps, you would, the highest direct correlation that you would be better for the earth, right? Not that cloud is better for the earth, but
yeah, so I'd say
FinOps, good
yes,
FinOps would be good for the earth.
yes, no, and maybe. And the reason for that, as I'm sure Patrick would very much know, is there's many actions you can take in the world of FinOps which actually don't encourage efficient use and consumption, because things like spend-based commitments. The cloud providers are very good at convincing you to make long-term commitments, which is just a very expensive way of buying IT. They give you great discounts, but it's still very expensive. And that actually, from a GreenOps perspective, does not encourage efficient consumption, because there's no motivation to turn something off below a threshold that you've already committed to. And there's areas where you could have something like a more sustainable region. The more sustainable regions tend to be the newer ones, and the newer ones tend to come with higher unit costs. Not all the time, but a lot of the time. So what you have is a problem there is there are directional things which are brilliant in FinOps with GreenOps. So things like if you are optimizing or right-sizing instances, awesome. You're reducing your consumption, you're reducing your power, you're reducing your embodied emissions. You're turning things off. So you're switching dev environments off overnight. Brilliant, perfect for GreenOps. So the truth is, some are, some aren't. You have to take it in context. And that's the important thing. It's that lens of what is the impact of my action. And the big thing is people always try and do these things in isolation. So they have the sustainability team or they have the FinOps team. And the problem is you end up accidentally pulling in different directions. It's actually that the where GreenOps works well is where it's not a separate function, it's just a business as usual thing. So it's something that you build into your day-to-day work and it becomes part of everyone's job, not just someone's job.
Okay. So then taking this to the next step, is cloud native best practices, the engineering best practices, better for the earth or more secure or more reliable?
Well, I'd say from Patrick, I'd let him answer that one actually, because if you are taking the most efficient approach to building your service and the most cost-effective approach at the start, then likely yes. But Patrick, that's definitely one for you.
I think, the answer is it depends. Like
Oh, God.
most of the quite big questions in life, it depends. And I've seen an interesting trend lately of big companies deciding to move out of the cloud and back to data centers, primarily for security and just understanding that maybe it's a bit easier to manage the fixed cost of a data center than the variable cost of cloud. But I think it definitely does depend, and even down to the workload and what the intention of the application is that you're trying to build, as well as the just knowing that Mark mentioned things like scheduling resources to turn off and on. That's something that's very beneficial to the bottom line as well as to the environment. And for us at Harness, when they were developing a capability called auto stopping, they're treating it like modern conference rooms where you walk into a room and the light turns on and you walk out 5 minutes later it turns off, right? You're enabling the functionality without the user having to think about it, without them having to manage the time schedule that something should be off and on and trying to predict when it's going to be used. And for that, that often is a deterrent for people using capabilities and trying to be green. So I think to me, the question really revolves around what is the right approach for the company, for the workload, and for our end users and our bottom line. So it can depend.
Okay.
I think that, sorry, Alice, because there is also an elephant in the room when it comes to things like cost as well. So one of the biggest principles of GreenOps is it lets you get to leadership. And because often this is not true of everyone, but in a great number of organizations, there's a significant amount of waste. So typically we find when you strip out all the waste that exists, not the obvious waste, but all the waste, it's normally about 50 cents in every dollar is wasted on IT. And that isn't just the obvious things, the right sizing and turning things off. It's actually things like the over design in the first place, the wasted resources during development, the standardization that hasn't been updated for many years. There's lots of hidden waste that people can't see. And often we find that actually leadership aren't actually motivated that much by cost savings. They all pretend they are, but actually the reality is they're not actually that motivated by it. So what you find is going to them with a cost saving message on its own often doesn't get the result you want because there's so many other dependencies, whether it's risk, governance, compliance, time to invest, the time required to do it, the resources available. And we find if you take the sort of the environmental lens to this, you don't catch everyone, but you catch enough of them. And you can often win the hearts and minds of senior leaders because the subject you're talking about is something that vaguely interests them. So it gets you into the more strategic conversations. Because one of the biggest successes we have in the world of GreenOps, particularly when it comes to cloud, is the whole, and I hate the phrase, but I use it anyway, shift left. And what we mean by that is shifting from the world, because sustainability in GreenOps often gets stuck in the world of reporting. And reporting changes absolutely nothing. What you hear is people saying that our emissions are X tons. And you go, great, well, is that big? Is that small? We don't know. No one knows because the data is so poor and low quality. But when you start shifting left, then people go into like optimization. And the problem with optimization is like getting a broom and trying to brush away the tide sweeping in over your feet on the beach. You might have a little bit of success, but tomorrow morning that tide's coming back in. But when you shift into avoidance, what you're doing is you're actually trying to address the problem before it's even happened. And the hardest thing in the world of FinOps is avoidance is something that's really hard to measure because you can't really measure what you didn't do, but you can feel the benefit later. And execs really struggle with that understanding that you go, well, so you're saying you've updated our standards, our governance, our best practice, and you, yes, and that's why our bill has gone down. That's why our environmental impact has gone down, because we made conscious decisions not to deploy. So we did things like as standard, we automated the scheduling of things to be switched off at night in dev environments. We standardized on the right sizing. We chose different instances that had a lower power consumption. We chose things in the right region. So you're making that decision really early. So and often those decisions made early, they also have one unique thing in mind. So Patrick, if I was to come to you and say, you've got a bunch of live applications and I want you to switch instance types from an Intel to a Graviton processor type, and I need it done straight away, you will fight me tooth and nail to not do that because of the complexity, the risk and the cost involved in doing it. And you'll look at me with cold dead eyes and you'll say, here are the 9 million reasons why you're dumb. You don't understand why we can't do this. But conversely, if 8 months before, when this was in the ideation phase, I came to you and said, look, we could do something differently, those decisions aren't baked in yet. And when those decisions aren't baked in, people are much happier to change. And that change could be as simple as, we're going to deploy this in Singapore, for example, massively high carbon region, very high impact. Why don't we put part of this platform in Sweden during the development phase? Because that's low carbon energy. You could do that in the early phase because people are more willing to have the conversation. Once it's live, you try moving anything and everyone will find a reason to say no, because you've got like 97 business units have to sign off the move. 5 different VPs have to allocate resource to remapping out applications. There's so many other things that drag you. So the whole principle of GreenOps is that principle of use the data you have and shift it left. So adjust your processes, your standards. And the biggest thing that we want people to do, and this is the hardest thing, and we kind of talked about this previously actually, which is the principle of actually how you budget and how you spend are one of the biggest drags and cause of waste in enterprise IT today.
Explain that.
So if you take, say, take an average large enterprise, they will have a run budget and they have a change budget. And often they can't get a run budget for subsequent years. So what they do is the application or business unit bloats their change budget as much as they can to grab as many resources up front as they possibly can. They encourage massive oversizing of resources, massive overcommitment, because they don't know what they might need in subsequent years and they cannot guarantee they're going to have a run budget. So because they can't guarantee they're going to have a run budget, they spend as much as they can in the crazy time to go, well, spend it whilst we can. And you get that whole thing of, we might not have the budget next year, so let's spend it now, which is just complete nonsense. It never happens, but people have the fear that it will. And so because of that, you can't move budgets between allocations. You can't change pots. You can't change things because you're not in charge of that budget. So what happens at the back of that is you end up actually with massive overspend, which causes massive bloat and massive waste. But if you could show the leadership the impact of those decisions, you'll find they're much more willing to actually make changes to reflect, actually, should we change how we budget? Should we change how we allocate funding? Because that also has an impact on them higher up in the chain.
So how we've talked about a lot of, part of the problem is there's so many stakeholders and you need to convince really high up. So you need all those pieces together to convince high up and plan ahead. How are you, I guess we should take a second to how are you bringing all of this information together? How are you creating a centralized view of everything to then have the capability to talk across these different departments? Is it a platform? What is the answer to then be able to then strategically make this argument moving forward?
So I have a fairly blunt perspective on this.
Which is?
Let's hear it.
The answer is never another tool. IT has a problem to say, let's throw a dashboard at this problem. And they'll build things in isolation. So from my perspective, we always see, particularly large enterprises, they go, we're going to build our climate dashboard. We're going to build our central sustainability dashboard. And they get so excited over doing it. And they build this big central thing. They consolidate all the data and they bring it in there. So they'll do like cloud data enrichment. They'll start getting a baseline of the cloud services and they'll be really proud. And they build this separate thing. And the problem is, within about 3 months, everyone's got bored of it and no longer goes to it. So actually, what you need to focus on is improving the quality of the data you have and then get that data into the tools and systems that you're already working in. So go into every function, every area, whether it's particularly like for FinOps is a brilliant example. So you get this data into your FinOps view, get it into those tools that the people are using already. So take it to them and get that same data into the observability tools, get it into the DevOps tools. You have to, because there is no one KPI to rule them all. People like to try and come up with one, but there just isn't one. And that's because everyone looks at this problem through a different lens. But what
Well, I think to that point, sorry, Mark, I didn't mean to cut
carry
you
on.
off. Yeah, I think to that point, you're absolutely right. It's not, one KPI to rule them all, and there's not one solution for this. You have to force the hard work for the people who can make the decisions to get in the room and say, okay, what is the problem we're trying to solve before we decide, let's get another tool or let's spin up a dashboard or let's, whatever the solution is, right? They have to agree on what is the problem that they are going to commit themselves to solve and to do the hard work. And when things get really hard, to push through and take it to the end. And for different companies, that might be completely different priorities. Some might be interested in reducing cost because their stock is underwater, or they might, be interested in environmental impact. And so, they don't care so much about cost. I mean, it would be generally you would say they correlate, where if you're driving down your environmental impact, your cost would come down in most cases, but not all. I think that's really, you have to start by examining what is the problem we're here to solve before you decide on what tool or which way forward.
Yeah, the unit economics of it are very important, because you need to find the metric that works for the persona that you're talking to, and you need to visualize that in a way that works with how they currently think and behave today. Because bringing in endless new KPIs, OKRs, and metrics never really gets you very far, because if they're not stuck in them already, it just won't work. They won't use them. And you also have to show how it's aligned with what they actually care about. Because often you'll find there'll be, the major strategic initiatives for the year. There'll be like a data center modernization, a cloud transformation, an application modernization, all the lovely phrases we have. If you can show how you're going to align this with them to help that be a success, you've got a much greater chance of them jumping on board. Because the one thing we have found is when you use environmental metrics, it's a really good motivator for enough people to want to get involved and understand more. Because what you're doing is you're giving them a different lens to view a problem that they already know exists. Because everyone in IT knows where the waste is often. The problem is not finding the waste. The problem is getting people to get out of the way of you eliminating the waste in the first place. Because it isn't as simple as everyone thinks. There are so many other dependencies and roles and people involved in doing it. But if you show them their impact, so for example, we often see things like application demise projects that are massively stalled, where it's services that are just left running. Often they're just left running because the department whose budget it was, it's already committed for them. They don't get any money back if they switch it off. There is no saving for them, so they really don't care about it. But what happens is they have a cost associated to them of terminating something. So they actually have to allocate resource on their side to switch things off and terminate stuff, and they don't get any money back, so they can't really be bothered to do it. But if you show them the environmental drag associated with, every month that you're not switching this off, it's another 5 tons of carbon, for example, they're more likely to be motivated to get involved. And also, we have to be conscious that carbon doesn't motivate everyone. Often you have to find another metric.
I was gonna push back on that just to play devil's advocate.
I don't think it does.
Yeah, I mean, listen, I would put myself in the camp of environmentally conscious, but just to push back and hear more of your perspective, Mark, because you're closer to it than I am. Carbon feels like a more abstract concept to me than a dollar. And so I don't think that engineers or even leaders would care as much about carbon impact, and that would motivate them to make the change. How do you see that playing out, or like maybe it's not the only, I'm sure it's not a binary, like what else?
Yeah, so it's actually more about. Yeah, so that's where when you get into it, there's a lot of heavy lifting you have to do to get people to the understanding of how big is big. Because when you just give them a metric like a ton of carbon, that's a really abstract thing. So you have to quantify it in terms that they understand. And people always come up with terms like flights from Philadelphia to New York, or flights from Barcelona to Glasgow, that kind of thing. You get this kind of thing. So you have to find a metric that lands. And often also carbon is one sometimes that you have to separate out because it's so abstract. And you have to find other things as well. So often energy is used now as well, even though energy is only a subset of emissions, a very small subset, but they still want to quantify that to have, what is our carbon efficiency per dollar spent, for example, is a KPI we often see. So they can start saying, basically, what levers can they pull? And that's actually part of bringing it into the world of FinOps as well, is aligning it with existing unit economics that are being utilized and just show a different lens on the number.
Yeah.
And then there's also the really interesting thing we're finding, because you mentioned people starting to move from the cloud back to their own data centers. We're starting to see that as a real trend, particularly for services like AI. And the reason
Hmm.
is because AI is so ridiculously expensive in the cloud that actually people can't afford to run production systems and they want the control. Because in the cloud, if you oversize something on an AI platform, it's not $1 million mistake, it's a $30 million mistake.
Yeah.
So actually you get greater controls and limitations, and then you go back to the old world of everyone can see it when you're running out of capacity. It's really under your control and your eye line.
Yeah. On the staying on the topic of carbon as the sort of currency in this equation, when I was doing a little bit of reading and research and prep for our talk today, and we've at Harness have studied the cost of AI, like the actual dollar cost of AI, because we have customers and prospects who ask us, what does our FinOps platform do for the cost of AI? And it does a lot. And I won't go into all those details. The point of mentioning that is to the typical company out there that spends hundreds of millions of dollars on cloud infrastructure every year, they spend less than 1%, less than I think even 0.5% on AI. But it's just the mind share of AI is so great these days, obviously. And like when I look at when I book a flight to go somewhere, now my ticket comes and it tells me how much carbon I'm contributing to the environment for this flight. Again, it's such an abstract concept to me. But when I was doing the research for this, I wanted to know, how wasteful is AI? And the one interesting thing that I found was that, and I'm just checking some of my notes, AI data centers are expected to consume 6 times more fresh water than the entire country of Denmark. That all of a sudden to me is like, that's a lot of water. Like if I think about how many bottles of water I would have to consume for that to matter, like
But
that's
will it
something.
motivate you to not use AI in any way? Are you rethinking like, oh, maybe I shouldn't use AI right now?
Maybe, yeah. I mean,
Really?
in the moments when you can avoid it, I mean, you do a Google search and it's gonna run the the AI summary at the top, regardless if you want it or not. But you're right, like that's the thing. So I think maybe the unlock there is, and Mark, you're sort of alluding to it, is get it to a metric or just a data point that people understand. Because if we just talk carbon, I just feel like it's going to go over most people's heads.
Can I say other things? Because I'm going to try to bring the voice of Anne or imbue my Anne as she's still trying to get online, which I can't imagine how frustrating that is. So thank you for your patience, Anne, and everyone that is here. So we were talking before this call about how to make leadership care. And it's not just about money, cloud spend, or the environment. There's other ways that maybe might pull that lever more that will end up helping all those things. But we talked about before security or resiliency, because right now, if you have like, was it 50% of services might be zombies, or we don't even know how many zombie services, like these are huge risks if you're not maintaining things, if you're not upgrading. These are other ways. So
absolutely, yes. Yeah, there's a compliance risk, there's a governance risk, there's all sorts of risks like that that come into it, that come diving right in. And that also you also have concentration risk factors as well. So we're increasingly starting to see, particularly very large consumers, are looking at the risk of how many of their competitors are also running in the same cloud regions as them. Do they want to be in that same cloud region? Should they be diversifying services into different regions? And then they have to look at availability of resources, because that's particularly relevant for in the world of AI, where actually you want to be in a certain region, but you just literally cannot get the resource because they can't build it fast enough at the moment because of the rate at which people are trying to consume it. Yeah. So actually you have to make very conscious decisions. And there are also then issues from a corporate perspective, where you look at things like, are there risks to water usage in the region in which you're operating? Are you actually adding to the problem? So you're not being a good corporate citizen by using a data center in region X. It doesn't mean the data center is to blame. It just means you should be reducing the workload and putting it somewhere else.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, what Anne had said when we talked about, because I was just, it's very frustrating to see continual layoffs when you could cut 50% of your cloud cost. And then if you have to do layoffs, take more time to do them more sensibly. So my understanding is that leadership has to care more than, and environment and even
But
spending may not do that. But if you invest in operations, and was trying to explain to me, we were talking about this because I was just very frustrated, and said like investment means building the skills of your operations teams in resilience and security, because that will have a knock-on effect of cutting waste. So it's also about building into your staff these resiliency,
yeah,
security
so,
things that you have to compliance.
yeah, and so one of the hardest things about the work that we often have to do is when we talk about that shift left thing of working with leadership, is we effectively have to tell them that their people are not the problem, their technology is not the problem, they are the problem. And it's how to
I love
articulate
it.
that phrase to leadership, which is big decisions can't be made because they're in the way of those big decisions. So they're the ones who aren't giving the time, the resource, and the budget to do it. And they're the ones, if you take that example you gave of layoffs, where despite a huge amount of waste on spend, people are saying we're still going to have to cut heads. And you could say, but hang on, I could save $500 million over here a year. There's no need for you to cut heads, but simply because someone at a CFO level is unwilling to change how they budget or allocate funds means actually you end up having to cut a huge amount of headcount simply because one exec somewhere does not want to change because they don't understand the impact of their decision. So there is a certain level of problem here where we have a lack of accountability at an exec level where they don't effectively have their eye on the detail. Because I often go to very large organizations and you find they don't have a clue, for example, what their cloud spend is, where it is. They don't understand the level of waste they've got. They don't know how, the data center investment. They don't know the server utilization. They don't know these core metrics that they really should know. Because this isn't just a cloud problem, by the way, because we're sort of focused on that because obviously that's the kind of the subject. But in data centers, there's also epic amounts of waste that happens as well. So it's not like data centers are perfect. You get a lot of really low utilization in on-premise data centers in the same way, where things get built, deployed, run, not turned off. Exactly the same problems exist. So it all comes down to giving people the time they need to make the decisions they need, because engineers don't deliberately make inefficient decisions. They want to develop things efficiently and consume them efficiently, but actually the complexity of the organization gets in the way of those decisions often because they're stuck with the
Yeah.
bounds of what they can change.
Yeah. I think the challenge with, with the evolution of cloud infrastructure and the big migration to cloud was that, and sort of, in my opinion, one of the leading causes of inefficiency in the cloud is just that the majority of the engineers who were moving things to the cloud were steeped in data center concepts and infrastructure and like fixed capacity. And basically you stand up a server and you get the whole thing and you don't get the question. And there was a time before there were virtual machines and the ability to load balance capacity. um, that's that's just the evolution of it. And I think we need a we need to be able to say in front of our peers, I don't know the best way to do something,
Mhm.
but I'm willing to learn, as long as I don't get thrown under the bus or discarded because I don't know today. Like, we're seeing better efficiency in the cloud than we saw 5 years ago. We're seeing, um, we're seeing a shift back to data centers as well for other reasons. So I think it's just a matter, and I think probably it's the same in the GreenOps space, is that there's a lot we don't know collectively and individually. And that really, I feel like if we could take down that sort of stigma of not knowing, then we might be able to move forward a little better, a little
Yeah,
more
no,
efficient.
I would absolutely agree because there is particularly in the world of the kind of the environmental data that people are using, none of it is perfect, all different levels of quality, and you often spend too much time arguing about the quality of the data than you do about fixing the problem. It's just a case of how big is the unit of something. We know this
Yeah.
waste, let's get that unit, which then sort of becomes a problem for people to then try and actually fix and address. And it's how you then take that data and manipulate it and get it into a way that people in all the different functions who are involved, and that goes anything from kind of supply chain through engineering through to leadership. There's no one single place here. everything has to answer the question. So I see there's a question in chat, which is an interesting one. So caring about carbon is a cultural thing. Europeans care and Americans don't. So
I mean, I would never lump Europe is a continent with as many people as the United States, and both have diverse opinions. So I do want to take, as an American living in Europe, that stance.
Yes.
That is an individual thing, but I guess what we should take this as because I don't know that we can say that the top 100 companies in Europe are doing the due diligence, but certainly there is more regulation specifically in the EU to do that and measure it. I think we could say, I wouldn't say it's a cultural thing or a binary in that way. I would just jump in to say.
Yeah, no, I would say I would tend to agree, because I work a lot with American firms, and what we find is you're right, there's more of a balance of organizations in the US who don't care, because their priority is actually about growth, stability, and that side of things. And there's more companies in Europe who do care, but it's not that black and white. It comes down to, actually, I'd say there's probably, if I was to separate it actually between the workforce and the leadership, very different thing then. Leadership in the US definitely does not care right now. There are many reasons for that, but leadership does not care.
They have no motivator. It's
Yes,
different. The
yes.
reason European leadership or leadership in Europe or the EU may care because they are like financially motivated by 2027 to comply, to measure, to report, which is completely different cultures governmentally.
Yeah, but there is also an interesting second question that's come in there, which is about the energy price change impact. That is actually a very good motivator in the world of GreenOps. And that's why I mentioned other metrics other than just carbon, because if you start building energy in, people start looking at the energy impact of their consumption and comparing and contrasting on-premise with the cloud estimations of what they might be consuming, and realizing actually there is a huge impact, because the unit economics involved in energy pricing, energy is becoming a substantial proportion of cloud unit costs. And you're starting to see more cost spikes on a per unit basis, just simply because the cost is going through the roof. And that's where you're now seeing cloud purchasers buying energy commitments longer and longer ahead. And also that's one of the reasons why some of them are investing in renewable energy, so they can get more of their energy supply under their control as well. So geopolitically as well, there's that challenge to handle. So it isn't just the carbon impact, it's the energy sourcing. And the other big problem that all big hyperscalers have, which is they can't build fast enough because they can't get the connectivity to the grid. They literally cannot get the power they need in certain regions, and they're running out. And so there's a societal impact of that as well. So we're starting to see the impact of data centers are causing an impact on the local societies surrounding them as well, where they're getting priority over energy supply over local societies, including things like hospitals and other critical services. So there is market fluctuations is an excellent driver to drive the motivator to optimize, to be as frugal as possible. Because the whole principle of frugal by design is something which we're now starting to see, because we saw a very interesting test in a UK organization. What they did was, because in their old world where they were in a data center, they were limited by the physicality of what they had. Because if someone wanted more resources, someone had to sign off and buy a new server, as simple as that. They couldn't just go and consume it. When they went into the world of cloud, they weren't very mature, so it spiraled very quickly because the control went to the edges and everyone could do anything because they were all cool kids. But what they said, so all their costs massively spiked, despite the cloud providers telling them they were going to save money by moving to the cloud. Harsh reality, they didn't. Their IT spend went up by 80%. But what they did was they did a test in their ecosystem, which was they went in and said, right, we're assuming we cannot consume any more resources. There's been a geopolitical event. We cannot increase our cloud spend at all because there are no more resources available. And suddenly, the funniest thing was, everyone's mindset shifted from let's switch on and test everything and do new things to actually what can we optimize? What can we switch off? What are we not using? What services are pointless? What should we put on the backlog? What should we not do? And from a business perspective, nothing changed. There was absolutely no impact. So actually, cloud was not delivering the value they thought it was. It was just a thing that delivered the platforms they were running.
It's about designing for resiliency and uncertainty. Just something I want to mention, and Anne will be joining in the Slack community so we can do asynchronous conversation. Frustrating that she couldn't join, but especially for her, of course, after we did all this prep. But I would definitely follow Ann Curry on LinkedIn because she's been playing around with this idea of solar native, which does not mean just solar power, but the idea that maybe you can do workloads that automatically shift to when whatever renewable energy is available is available. I just want to briefly, as we wind down, give one of our last questions that I think is, we could do an entire webinar on this, but the reader, the viewer wrote, it was mentioned that a new dashboard isn't the answer. Neither is optimization, like right sizing your instances. What is the pivot panel's first suggested step for any organization trying their hand at something like GreenOps for the first time?
So
Don't.
a new dashboard is not the answer.
Yeah.
But,
what is the
but
first step?
optimization and right sizing definitely is. So doing the things you know you should already be doing, but using environmental data to assist you with that. So don't do it in isolation. So don't just have a separate team doing it. Work with the FinOps teams, work with the engineering teams, bring the visibility of the data into that stream. Don't do it in that isolation. And if you can, build it into the dashboards you already have. So what I was saying there was, don't go and buy another tool just for the sake of it that people won't use. Build it into your existing systems of record and services that people are comfortable with. Because engineers hate being told, here's another thing you've got to go and log into to do something. They just want to live in the tools they're comfortable with. If you do that, it works so well because it's in their eye line. They can see it alongside the metrics they're using as well.
Okay, Patrick, last word. What would you do as the first step?
I agree. I think it's meet your engineers where they are with the data that matters, and encourage them to continue on their right sizing journey. And you've got to sort of, humans are motivated by different factors, and some might be motivated by seeing the bill go down. Others might be motivated by carbon impact. Others might be motivated by something completely different. So it's really talking to your constituents and understanding what it is that motivates them, and what would be helpful to them or not. I think Mark hit on most of it, which is, I think FinOps has a lot to contribute to GreenOps. So I would say it's continue doing what you're doing in that space, but just bring the awareness to we're impacting much more than just our cloud bill. There's environmental impacts, there's societal impacts, et cetera. Mark talked about data centers taking priority over local citizens for electricity. You could show impact there as well.
Absolutely. And just to give a little tease to join us in the Slack community, I've already added it there. Ann's in there. So we continue in asynchronous. Lead Dev is a wonderful community where you can continue that conversation. I've shared in the Slack and those that join us. But just to tease, there was the question of who are the right people to tackle cloud resource usage and how can they find the right levers to start tackling it. And if you're not sure, we need more transparency in our organizations. But I think there's a lot of work to do. It is urgent, and it's tied in with the urgency to make your systems more resilient. You cross purposes between compliance, security, business, technology, all need centralized viewing, centralized communication, talking together. So I wish everyone luck. I really want to thank Mark and Patrick and Anne, who is joining us already in the Slack. We will continue the conversation. This is an important one, and I hope it may have brought more questions to you than answers, but they're questions to bring back to your team and your organization. So thank you so much. Thank you, Harness, for supporting this and Lead Dev. Thank you, Mark and Patrick. And good luck, y'all. We're just on the start of a really urgent, important journey. Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.